This is Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Atheist Enlightenment. I am your host, Josh the Archon, or you can just call me Josh, and this is the Atheist Enlightenment. At first, before we get started, I just want to welcome in our guest for tonight, who's actually going to delve into the conversation with me of free will. So, Godless Granny, thank you so much for coming in. Please introduce yourself to our fellow audience members.
Hello, I'm Godless Granny, and I've been an atheist now for 3 years, and I have a channel myself, and on my channel, I discuss a number of different aspects of atheism, but because I was a believer for 42 years and I studied the Bible very thoroughly, I mostly pick apart theology. But in addition to being a ex Christian, I'm also a trans parent. And so trans issues are also very close to my heart. And so, because I'm an advocate for trans issues, I'm also an advocate for other LGBT groups. I am an asexual myself, and so I kind of fit under the umbrella. And I usually kind of consider myself right at the very edge of the umbrella. Sometimes I say I'm under it, and sometimes I say them, because I don't really feel like I belong in the group, but technically I do. I guess part of the reason I don't totally feel like I belong is I've never felt the ostracism that uh, a lot of people that are in the LGBTQ community have, because it's never really been an issue for me. Um,
Oh,
and then I do a lot of women's issues as well, obviously, since I am a woman and having come from very what's the word I'm looking for?
paternalistic.
Not paternalistic. That's the one I almost said, but that's not the one I want. Patriarchal, very patriarchal religions and churches that were very, very misogynistic.
Oh, okay. And when we're looking at, just to flesh out just a bit of the situation, what was one of the reasons, before we jump into the free will discussion, what was one of the main reasons that made you start to wonder that this was a direction that wasn't for you?
Well, I assume what you mean is why I deconverted.
Exactly.
Yeah, okay. When it first happened, when I lost my faith, I talked about how Noah's Ark was the straw that broke the camel's back, and it was. There is absolutely no question, because biblical inerrancy was central to my theism.
Hmm.
And so it only would take one point of the Bible being proven to me to be absolutely and unquestionably wrong to break the entire thing. But the reason I was even able to get there was because of some thinking that I had been doing about a year before that happened. And it was primarily reflecting on the life of the Apostle Paul. And I was thinking about the fact that Jesus appeared personally to Paul. Why? Because Jesus wanted to recruit him, he wanted him as a disciple. And I thought about, well, if Jesus wanted Paul and could appear to him personally, could he not do that for everyone?
Hmm.
Well, if he's omniscient, I mean, if he's, yeah, if he's omniscient, obviously he can. And, if he's omnipotent, he obviously is able to do that.
Hmm.
So the only possible reason that he doesn't do that would be because he doesn't want to.
Oh.
And I inadvertently arrived at the divine hiddenness problem, because I looked at it, and I had always known that, but I had always looked at it from a believer's point of view, that, oh, God wanted me. Wow, isn't it special that God wanted me? But for the first time, I reversed that and started thinking about, What about the people that don't believe? Is it because God didn't want them? And now the Calvinist would say, yes, absolutely. They're not the chosen ones. God didn't want them. Um, and I could not accept that a benevolent God would create someone that he didn't want. That just makes no sense. And that's when my theology shifted. And even though I was still attending a church that was Calvinist, I no longer held to the Calvinist doctrine. I now really was more of a universalist. And I came up with the idea that there had to be some way that everyone had an opportunity to be a believer and to go to heaven. And I really honestly thought that, even though it's not in the Bible, that the Bible is only the story of earth. It only tells you what happens on earth. There's very little in the Bible that tells you about what does not happen on earth. And so I came to the conclusion that after people die, they're going to appear before God. God's going to lay out the whole story and say, this is who I am. Do you want to live with me in heaven forever or not? And then people would be able to make a reasonable, rational, informed choice instead of, trying to make a choice based on the sketchy information that we have. And so I kind of came up with my own theology at that point. But I still held to biblical inerrancy because that was the foundation of my faith.
Hmm.
But then when I was shown that Noah's Ark couldn't happen and the foundation was broken, then the whole house of cards collapsed.
Wow. Okay. Okay. So in a sense, the aspect of Noah's Ark, and let alone that God was willing to send certain people just to hell for no apparent reason, just based on their apparent story that he's written, was the thing that kind of helped build that prospect. If I'm
That helped build the prospect. But the thing that really broke it for me was when Aaron Ra said that history disproves Noah's Ark. And when he said that, I started thinking about it and I thought, I've taken a lot of history courses, and in not a single one of them has any history professor ever said, okay, and then this civilization was wiped out, and 100 years later, they started to rebuild.
I see what you mean.
Never. There are civilizations that rise and fall all over the globe. And any history class you take, any course you take in ancient history, they will tell you about how this civilization arose and at this period they got wiped out and they probably were conquered by another people or whatever. And they'll say, maybe this land remained unused for a certain period. And you can tell that by the artifacts that are found in the archaeological digs.
Right.
But at no time was there a wiping out of every population on the entire planet.
Exactly.
History just doesn't match the Noah story. And it was at that point, and it's funny because so many Christians come at me and say, well, you just believe in science, don't you? I say, no, I believe in history.
Right? Exactly. I really like, because I think that there are certain theists that kind of forget, like they talk about the historicity of Jesus and everything like that, but the one thing that I think they completely miss out on is the actual history itself, and how we can look at all over. And if you're talking about a global flood or a global event, and yet not one historical civilization even speaks about this event at all, now we
Mm-hmm.
need to call it to question. I completely agree with you on that. I think
Mm-hmm.
that's the thing that really slowly but surely starts to pile on top of the plethora of other things that are issues with
Mm-hmm.
the biblical narrative.
Are you familiar with Dr. Josh Bowen?
I am familiar with Dr. Josh Bowen. Yes,
Okay.
I've had a couple of conversations with him.
I love listening to him. Oh, fun fact. This is a funny story.
Hmm.
Um, I recently went to Better, which was a conference put on by Oz Tang, and Josh Bowen was one of the speakers there. And I was talking to him at one of the events, and I was standing right in front of him. And I am very short. I'm 5'1". Josh Bowen is very tall. And I said, Josh, and he was going like this down here because I was standing right in front of him and he couldn't see me.
Yeah. It's true. It's hard for us taller individuals because I'm 6'9".
Oh my
So
goodness.
yeah, so
Oh my
already
goodness. I
it's
probably only make it just a little past your belly button.
so yeah, I understand that sometimes it's difficult for tall people to like observe their full surroundings in a sense.
Well,
Yeah.
anyway, he is an expert on ancient Middle East history.
Right.
And, that's where I started from. And the education I've received from Dr. Josh and from some of the experts that he's had on his channel, especially the Egyptologists, just flush the Bible down the toilet.
Mm.
Um, Studying the history of Egypt, because the Egyptians were building pyramids through the entire time period that the flood and the Tower of Babel are supposed to be occurring.
Right. And that's the other thing too, right? It's not just that, but while Moses was leading his people across the Red Sea into
Mhm,
the Sinai Peninsula, there's
mhm.
one thing that doesn't really make sense is that when you cross the Red Sea, you would still be in Egyptian territory, right? Because
That
Egyptian territory moved all the way up to Canaan, in a sense.
mhm.
So if that is the case, where was he going? Because he wasn't escaping the Egyptians. He was just moving into their territory more.
That is one of the things that I learned from Dr. Josh, yes, and one thing that was hilarious is I analyzed a stream that, Sean McDowell put on with a man who had a doctorate in, oh, I forget what, because he called himself Doctor something, but I don't remember what his doctorate was, but it was not in history. And yet he's trying to talk about how archaeology proves the Bible. And one of his points of proof was this coin that was found in Canaan, or I'm sorry, not it wasn't a coin, but anyway, it was some kind of artifact found in Canaan that showed Egyptians with slaves. And duh, that's because Egyptians were ruling the territory at the time and they had slaves, and it
Yeah.
dated to the time of the Exodus. And he
Yep.
didn't even notice that his own evidence disproved his point.
Exactly. I find it hilarious when individuals who have no background in history, but yet try to bring history into validating their scriptural texts.
Mhm,
Just
mhm.
really baffles me sometimes. But
Another thing that I never saw as a believer was I didn't notice the numbers in Exodus.
huh?
That the Exodus claims that there were 600,000 men in addition to the women and children that went with Moses on the Exodus. Well, if each man had one wife and two children, that would be 2.4 million people. That would be the entire population of not just the region, not just the city, but the entire country of Egypt.
Yes. It's true because I think that people are so baffled today, right? That we're close to 8 billion people on this planet. And
Mhm,
so they're utilizing or they're looking. I think that that's the problem with presentism, right? Because you're kind of looking at the here and now, and not you, but the individual who's making these arguments isn't looking back to the historical time where most villages were lucky to even have 1 million, and even then that wasn't even that was miraculous in and of itself at that time period if you go back towards the early dynasty, the early Egyptian dynasties and
mhm.
everything, and let alone because I know it was in the Middle Dynasty that or was it the line? No, I think it was a Middle Dynasty where you see a lot of what the biblical narrative is trying to bring forward, in a sense. And you kind of see that that can't be, as you stated, possible if every man had a wife, and we're talking and two children or more, right? Where
Hmm.
it just doesn't make sense for that general time span. And it would be them who would be, if that was the case, the conquerors of Egypt, not the Egyptians conquering themselves, conquering the Israelites, if they had that much in number. So it's very interesting to see that there's a lot of, how can I say it? The historicity of biblical literature is completely missing in our modern times, and definitely within theological circles, I find. Because if you
Hmm.
can argue for that and you don't understand that position,
Hmm.
then you're not understanding the full story.
One of the reasons that that was very important to me was one of the things that built up biblical inerrancy for me during the formative time of my Christian faith was Josh McDowell's book, which was written by Sean McDowell's father, Evidence That Demands a Verdict and More Evidence That Demands a Verdict.
Hmm.
And in the book, Evidence That Demands a Verdict, Josh McDowell made the claim that no archaeological find has ever disproven anything in the Bible. Now, he wrote that book in around 1975. I actually saw Josh McDowell in person on my college campus.
Hmm.
Um, and that was fundamental to me. And one thing people your age have to understand is not only did we not have the benefit of the internet,
Hmm.
we didn't even have computers. So when someone made a claim like that to me, I had no way of verifying it. I mean, how do you go to the library and say, "Can I see a book on what archaeologists have not found?"
Good point. Good point.
And so young people today have such a huge advantage. It was funny. My son was telling me about how when he was in science or in science class in high school, and they told him that that we don't have the missing links between the supposed between apes and humans, and so he just did a simple Google search and found, oh gosh, now I can't think of the name of it. It's that very famous animated short. Purple will know what I'm talking about. Purple rhymes with orange. We'll probably put it in the chat in just a moment. But it's where that gorilla is arguing to the man and says, "Yes, we do. You know, the link is is Australopithecus afarensis, and but we don't have the link between. Yes, we do. It's Homo erectus. Yes, we do. It's Homo habilis."
Yeah.
And once he saw that, he knew that his teachers in school were wrong, and it didn't take him but 5 minutes to find that. And
Right.
I did not have that advantage. It took decades before I realized that I was lied to.
Oh, absolutely. And I don't think that it's anybody's, well, obviously it's nobody's fault, but I don't think that anybody who didn't have the information right at their fingertips, in a sense, like I don't find them to blame for the ideas that they had, based, as you stated, with testimony, with somebody who seems to have some sort of authority within the subject. It would make sense that you would be like, okay, it sounds legitimate. He has the supposed authority, and henceforth I'll just listen in and maybe kind of follow through with it, or I think that it's or however you wish to, the person wishes to take that information, right? But as you stated, just like with your son, when you're doing the same exact arguments now, when you have the internet at your fingertips, when you have all these works of literature at your fingertips, to me, I find that's when the individual is cherry picking in order to try to discredit a particular area within the sciences so that they can say, oh, look, this is wrong, or we haven't found this out yet. So henceforth, God, right? Or
Mhm.
henceforth, spirit, or henceforth, soul, or whatever the situation may be, based on what science hasn't figured out yet.
And
Yeah.
Purple found I was right. Purple knew exactly what I was talking about. And Purple has the comment up. It's from Futurama with Professor Farnsworth.
Yes. Yes.
Um, but one thing that's really interesting is the first major archaeological find that was disproving the Bible was done by Catherine Kenyon in 1956.
Huh.
And so this was it was well documented long before Josh McDowell wrote Evidence That Demands a Verdict that Jericho had been demolished and destroyed at least 100 and more likely 400 years before Joshua ever arrived. And so either when Josh McDowell wrote that book, he either disregarded that and was intentionally lying, or he did a bad job of researching the book.
Exactly. I completely agree with you. But I do agree with what Linear stated, because this was supposed to be a conversation based on free will, but sometimes going down a beautiful rabbit hole is excellent too. But let's try to bring it back, because I completely agree, but let's try to bring it back to the free will conversation. So
Okay.
my question would be, when we talk about free will, what exactly are we looking at? What are the mechanisms that we are dealing with when we're talking about free will in and of itself?
It makes a big difference who you are talking to.
True.
Because if you are talking to an Arminian, and I'm going to go ahead and explain the difference between Calvinism and Arminianism, because free will is a huge issue between them. But the Calvinist says that man does not have free will to choose God, that God chooses man before the foundation of the world, and God decided who would be saved even before creation. The Arminian says that man has free will to choose to follow God or not follow God. And so when you talk to a Calvinist and you talk about free will, the Calvinist will say that your life has been completely predestined by God. You have no free will to choose to go a different path other than the one that God made for you.
Hmm.
Now, that being said, the Calvinist will also completely contradict himself and say that you do have enough free will that you choose to sin, and that all people are sinners of their own free choice because you decide that you are going to sin, that God chooses your destiny and is in control of your destiny, but you are in control of your personal actions.
Huh.
I know it's completely contradictory. And whenever you speak to a Calvinist and you try to point out that that's incoherent, they will insist that it is not. They will insist that God controls the overall destiny, but man makes the day-to-day choices. But then when you ask them here, one of the things that is central to the Calvinist theology is that God is sovereign over everything. And John Piper is one of the biggest thinkers in the Calvinist movement today. And if you go and watch some of his videos, he will tell you that everything that happens was God's plan. If a person, if a woman is raped, that was God's plan. If a child is molested, that was God's plan. That God somehow has some kind of overarching purpose for this. But the person who committed these atrocities, even though they were part of God's plan, they still had the free will to decide to do them or not do them. I know it makes no sense. It's completely incoherent, but that is their theology.
That is really interesting to
Mhm.
look at, where it's kind of like walking that that thin line in a sense, whereas where it suits them is kind of like, well, you're determined or predetermined in order to do this. But as soon as to kind of point at somebody who's doing an ill or a horrendous thing, now it's that, well, we have enough free choice in order to decide to move away from God's own commandments or God's own dictations, which is, to me, as you stated, is extremely contradictory more than anything. And no, please.
Now, for the Arminian, when you talk to him about free will, he will say that free will was a gift of God, that God gave man free will, and man has the choice to do what he wishes with that free will, and that because man has free will, he can choose to follow God or choose not to follow God. And where this theology falls apart, well, it falls apart in a lot of places, but one of the places where I usually like to pick it apart is God in control of who goes to heaven? If man chooses whether or not he goes to heaven, then God has no control over that. It's completely in man's prerogative.
Interesting. Okay. So in a sense, the God is not all powerful because the prerogative has now been changed to mortal individuals, and mortal individuals have their actions estimate the final destination of where they're going to go, either if it's separate from God or with God, if I'm correct.
Yes. And another issue, and this is an argument that I got from the Calvinist, and I was making this argument as a Calvinist against the Arminians, is that if the Arminian position is correct, then Jesus' death on the cross saved no one. All he did was make an opportunity, a gateway by which man could choose to save himself.
That's actually a pretty good way of looking at it. If you're looking at a Calvinistic way of combating the Armenians, this is wow. Okay.
Now, looking at free will from a completely different perspective, which would be a secular perspective. And this is the one that is the most difficult for me because I am still working on this. I've read Sam Harris's Moral Landscape, and I understand some of what he said, but not all of it. But basically, there are some studies in psychology that now indicate that we may not have the free will that we think we do. Our actions may be more predetermined by our genetics and by our conditioning through our the things that happen to us. What's the word for that?
Based on like events or based on
just our life events, that are conditioning. It's a combination of nature and nurture. It's a combination of genetics and what went into us, that these things predetermine how we are going to choose, and that even though we think we are making choices, we don't really. And that is a really interesting aspect of the free will argument. And I'm on the fence on that one. I don't know which way to go. I don't know which one is right.
Yeah, and I think that's the most difficult point, right? Because I think that people want to see that, okay, well, not anything that I think of, but if I put my mind to something, I can do that thing. No matter what obstacles or issues that come my way, I can overcome those said obstacles and I can achieve that dream that I had. But if it's the opposite way around, and let's just say there's more of a deterministic prospect, which is there now, it's kind of like you might have some dream, but that dream could already be, well, maybe not already, but because of wants constantly changing in a sense, that can be the wants are the deterministic aspect, which then it's kind of like, what prospect are we looking at? Are we looking at determinism and through wants, or are we looking at free will through I have absolute control over what not only what I want, but over my thoughts in a sense, and how I can dictate or change my mind on maybe not a whim, but over long durations of time. How could I change my thought process into something different?
The primary argument that Sam Harris makes is because humans do not have as much free will as they think they do, we do not have the moral responsibilities that we think we do. And we probably should completely rethink our justice system. Because if a bear mauls a person, we don't punish the bear for being a bad bear because the bear was acting in accordance with his nature. That is what bears do. And it's not a bad bear, it's just a bear that was in the wrong place at the wrong time. And so we cage the bear, we move the bear where he's not going to cause harm, but we don't punish the bear for making a bad decision. And his argument is that that may also be true with humans. It may be that we don't need to punish people when they are not making the right choices. We need to recondition them. We need to give them the correct experiences, the correct education, so that they are able to make the correct decisions and arrive at a more socially accepted way of acting.
Okay, that's very interesting because I think the other thing too, right, is based on our emotions. I think that our emotions predominantly make us act in particular ways. And the I think that because in society there are individuals that, because even for me, when I look at individuals just in general, I see it within a spectrum that certain individuals do certain things because they have absolutely no self-control. But at the other end, individuals are able to do or able to control themselves in such a way that that thought and action do not correlate to the same thing, right? Because individuals can have thoughts, and sometimes if you look at somebody's thoughts, you'd be like, whoa, that's a little bit eerie there. But the thing is that the person is able to not act upon the thought. But I think where we need to look at when it comes to punishment, in a sense, is if the action is done in a abhorrent way or to individuals where they are a threat to society, in a sense, I think that's where and I know we can get into that in general, but I'm I'm just saying, like, this is the way that I kind of see things, where it's just like, okay, well, if somebody is a threat to society, the individual needs to be removed from said society, not harshly, but just removed elsewhere, or whatever the situation is, so that they do not harm anybody else within that said society. And that kind of comes back to the free will prospect, right? Because it's sort of like, well, is this person determined to be this particular way, or is there a way that we can actually recondition them to come back into society? And I think that's where we run into the gray area. It's just like, okay, would you trust this person enough to bring them back into society once they have done something that is heinous or something like that?
I think our society is far too focused, our justice system is far too focused on punishment and insufficiently focused on rehabilitation. Our system is set up to try to make the victim feel better because we have punished the perpetrator. And I understand that, and we do need to sympathize and we do need to support victims. But on the other hand, I don't think we do well by being so punishment driven. And I really think that religion has a lot to do with this. The Abrahamic religions are very focused on justice through punishment, and particularly punishment through death. And so we feel like punishment needs to be very harsh. And I don't think that that is where our justice system should be looking. We should be looking at, let's get everyone working together to achieve the common goals, not you made a mistake, you've had it, you're done for.
Hmm. Right. I can definitely see that, and I definitely think, and I think that's where the gray area really lies. Right, is sort of
Hmm.
like how we should be focusing on rehabilitation if people have done just like menial things, minor things. But then it's sort of like, for instance, just like how Linear stated over here, it sort of says, and some people do not seem to be able to be rehabilitated, like psychopaths, in a sense.
Yes. I
And
think Linear is absolutely right. And that was going to be the next point I was going to go to is, yeah, there are some people that cannot be rehabilitated, but we also can't go completely with, the heinousness of the crime, because some of the people, a good number of people in prison for murder did it because of a moment of rage, a single aspect where they lost control. And it's not a matter of them being a psychopath, it's not a matter of them being completely diametrically opposed to the goals of society. It was a matter of losing control. And yeah, something needs to be done. I mean, we can't just turn the other cheek and say, oh well, gee, that's too bad. You get one murder that you get away with. We can't go there. I don't know what the answer is. If I did know what the answer is, I would be in a much better position than where I am now. I'd be in Congress or something. Um, so I don't have the answer, but I do know that the system right now is not where it should be.
agreed. And I would agree with you as well that the system isn't the best system in order to tackle certain issues of criminality, I think.
And
So,
statistics bear this out. The United States has a higher percentage of its population in prison than any other developed country. Um, we have more people in jail that have never been convicted of any crime than any other country. In fact, the majority of people in jail today have never been convicted of any crime.
hmm, wow, that's mind-boggling just to hear, seriously. And as you stated, the system is definitely needing to be not just tweaked, but completely changed in order
Hmm.
to,
We
uh,
yeah, we need an
yeah,
overhaul.
exactly, a complete overhaul. And again, I think this brings in the free will prospect again, because it's it's that when we look at individuals and we look at our criminal system, at this very moment, as you stated, is predominantly focused on the punishment, not the rehabilitation of individuals, at least within the United States. And I would even say here in Canada as well.
Oh, you're in
So,
Canada. I
yeah,
assumed that you were in the States.
no, no. I'm in Canada.
I almost asked you where you were when I was on my stream, but some people don't like to say, so I didn't ask.
Oh no, so it's perfectly fine. I don't mind. Uh, yeah, so I'm in Canada, Quebec.
Okay.
So,
Parlez-vous
but
français?
oui, un petit peu, mais pas très bien.
That's
But
good.
thanks. But I think the aspect is, again, like when we look at free will, can the system actually be changed underneath the current paradigm? I mean, like, because I think that the free will prospect would make it seem like yes, it can, but it seems that the individuals who are making up these laws at this very moment are determined into making it just based on the punishments of individuals rather than the recuperation and reassociation of individuals back into society.
I think the first step is in your name. I
Wow.
think we need another enlightenment. And in this enlightenment, we need a better understanding and study of human thought. And I
Mm.
think once we have a better understanding of human thought, the human thought process, then we can have a better understanding of why people make the choices that they do. Why do some people offend and some people not offend? And once we have a better understanding of that, then I think we can change the justice system to go along with that thought process. But we're not there yet. We do not have the data. We don't have the studies. And that's on your generation to do.
Exactly. And I completely agree with that, because I think that's what, or at least that's how I see generations being.
Mm-hmm.
Making that next step so that the next the generation after them can actually live a better life.
Mm-hmm.
And I
Mm-hmm.
think that's the best way of looking at how generations should be looking at their current circumstances. How can I make my children have a better world than the world that I came in a sense?
Now, people have been making speeches. Yeah, I was in speech competition in high school and as an undergrad, and I was hearing people make speeches about overhauling the justice system to make it more focused on rehabilitation, even back in the late 70s and the early 80s. So this is
Mm.
nothing new. I think what is new is a better is we're starting to understand the thought process behind it.
Right. But I think also, and I think that's why there are certain individuals who keep holding on to theism for a certain extent, because I think the theist believes that they have the prospect of free will on their side. And that is through certain philosophical conversations that they have, which is based on, and a big one is qualia, the qualic aspects within one's brain. How does one understand, or how what's the question again that they ask? What is the feeling of redness, I believe it is, or what is redness, or something towards that extent. Where when you're thinking about it, it seems so simple, but then the more you read into it, you're like, wait a few seconds. Okay, I think somebody's onto something with this, right? And I think that when you have stuff that's mysterious, because I do agree, I think that with more modernization and everything like that, we're going to understand the human brain. We're going to understand human thought process a lot better than we do even today. However, I have a feeling that the more that we run into the unknown, the more that the theists will try to cement themselves within that unknown and say, well, yeah, we know this, this, and this, and this, and this, but this is something that we don't know about. And I think that's going to be, I guess you could say, the quote unquote curse of modernization. And if, let's just say, free will is the reality of things, I think that certain individuals, if that is the case, freely choose to actually undermine the science and the psychology and psychiatry and so on and so neurology and everything. So if that is the case, that seems that the situation for the future is still kind of, I wouldn't say bleak, but I would say there's some issues that need to be ironed out, in a sense, when it comes to that.
I think Purple is absolutely right when Purple said that some people hold on to theism because they can't deal with thinking that some injustices will go unpunished. And I think Purple is absolutely right that the theist comforts himself knowing that, hey, if we're not going to get justice in this world, at least we're going to get justice in the next world. But one of the areas where I pick apart the Arminian on the free will issue is the Arminian will also tell you that at creation, even before man existed, God had the plan in place to send Jesus to save man. And so then then I ask, okay, so God knew that man would fall even before he made man. Yes. Could man have chosen otherwise? Well, yes. So man could have completely destroyed God's plan, and God's plan could have never occurred. Well, no, that could not happen. So man could not choose. Well, yes, man could choose. so man could destroy God's plan. No, no, man. And they'll go back and forth with you like that.
This is very interesting. I love, because it's true, right? When you add something that's supposed to be omnipresent, omnibenevolent, I was about to say impotent, but
Omnipotent.
omnipotent, thank you. What ends up happening is that you kind of corner yourself between a rock and a hard place, because as soon as you start being asked questions, well, and if you're a free willer, then slowly but surely you start being pushed towards the deterministic prospect, because it's kind of like, well, if God already has this thought process out for human beings to go through, this is the process that they'll be, and he knows that they will sin, and he knows that he's going to have to send his only begotten son to earth in order to save the souls of his human beings. Then the question really is, well, how much free will is there for you to really work with? And I think that's why a lot of theists, or certain theists, are compatibilists. They try to mend or build, in a sense, in the middle, saying that, well, we do have certain amount of free will, but most things are determined. But even then, I find that there's issues with that also. But I find that when one chooses, and you have a God there, if one chooses either free will or determinism, it really is a difficult scenario for them to get out of, because of the questions that you can attack them on a free will prospect, or you can attack them on the deterministic prospect if they're free willers. So it's very interesting to see, and as you stated, very knowledgeable in order to actually hear that, and to see that these are the conundrums within these two faiths, I guess you can say, or these two sects of Christianity in and of itself.
I'm trying to answer Robert X, because Robert X said, sorry, I'm late. It's almost 5 a.m. And I was about to type, you're not late, Robert, you're early.
That's right. That's right. Oh.
But anyway, one other point that I like to bring up to the Arminian is, if there is complete free will, then God wills evil. God willed sin. And they ask, well, how so? Well, God chose to make Adam, knowing that Adam was going to sin. And so didn't God intend for Adam to sin? Well, if God intended that, that was God's will, that God's will and God's plan included sin and salvation. So of course, God's will was that man would sin. Yeah. And
Wow.
so man sinning was just man following God's will. It wasn't a rebellion against God's will, because that is what God's will was.
Wow. Yeah, that's a really good point to push back on too, like to the Armenians and their free will prospects, or aspects of their sect. And again, it's very interesting to hear these type of arguments, in a sense, because it kind of shows where the holes are within the sects that you're actually talking about, and how individuals just, I guess you can say that there's a sense of cognitive dissonance, in a sense.
Oh yeah,
right?
there's no question about it. There's no question. That was something that was very difficult for me as a believer, is I would come close to these questions, and when I would start touching on them, they were very difficult. And if I formulated it far enough that I got into a question I could not answer, I would go to my pastor, and most of the time I would get an unsatisfactory answer. Or an answer that was just, well, that it's all in God's hands, and somehow God's going to take care of it. And we don't know the big picture. God knows the big picture. So we'll just trust that God somehow is in control of this.
Wow. I think that that's also something that helps along somebody's deconversion in a sense, because you're going to an authoritative figure in order to ask your questions, in order to hopefully have them answered. But then as soon as you start seeing that even they're having a hard time either answering the question that you're posing them, or they're just like, oh, it doesn't matter, or oh, you need to have more faith. Like that's a huge thing that I constantly hear. You need to have more faith or whatever. And it kind of makes me wonder, are they stating that faith is better than reason, and that instead of utilizing reason in order to get
Oh yeah.
exactly.
They'll tell you flat out that faith is better than reason.
Mhm.
One thing that I find hilarious, though, is Frank Turek, who says, I don't have enough faith to be an atheist. And I'm thinking, okay, if atheists have more faith than you do, and without faith you cannot please God, then atheists are more pleasing to God than you are.
Huh. Wow. That is a really good way of coming at that. That is interesting. That's the thing. My number one thing that I constantly asked myself when I was a theist was that, what would God rather want? Would God rather want something to blindly believe in it, or would it, for the reasons why we have our cognition to begin with, through reason, get to the ultimate answer? And I've always been baffled by the theist that says, no, 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 faith is the ultimate tool or key, I mean, in order to understand God. But then what is the point of cognition then? There shouldn't be, or there should at least be just minimum cognition, minimum just logic that human use, and most of it should just be based on faith. But the reality is that we're so curious as a species that it shows that the logic and reason behind our species in the first place is what truly drives us, rather than just the faith itself.
When I was a believer, I was very much able to accept the answer, just have faith
Mm.
to most of my questions. The one question that I asked of a number of different pastors and never got a satisfactory answer on, that I could not accept that for, was the question of how we got the canon. Because that is not a matter of faith. That is a matter of, human beings got together and determined that these books are going to be in the Bible and these books are not. And I asked a number of pastors, how did we get our canon? And most of them blew me off.
Wow.
And I think a big part of that is because I am female.
Mm.
You know,
That is true. That is
I
true.
don't need to answer this woman.
And
This woman isn't going to understand the things that I learned in seminary and studied. Why should I share all of my great learning?
it baffles the mind when I look at the way that I used to think, and let alone when I'm still seeing this particular way within even the cults of today, which utilize Christianity as their fundamentals, like Jehovah's Witness or whatever else there is, or Mormonism, for instance, is just that how could you look at your own parishioners, and let alone women parishioners, and just blow off their questions like, oh, no, 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 these. And as you stated, I think that it is a religious thing in the end. Because even when we look at Roman times and everything like that, it was also based on said religious customs that the Romans sort of looked down on, and also the Greeks, in a sense, or the Hellenists, I should say, looked down on females as well, unless you're talking about Sparta or maybe even Syracuse. But besides that, you really look at these cultures, and I wonder that, and even if it's nowadays, how could you go to university or CGIP and still think, oh, these women don't know what they're talking about? That was the thing that blew my mind, and that's why I don't know.
Take a look at the video that I made in response to Braxton Hunter on Calvinism, because I was absolutely blown away when he made the ridiculously misogynistic statement that, men, you should tell your wives about this, because women can study apologetics too, because women are capable of understanding these things. And I went, wow, are you serious? I played that like 3 times in that video, and I said, I used to respect Braxton Hunter as a serious apologist, but once he made that statement, nope. Women can understand these things. Oh, he wrote a book recently, and I did review. Fortunately, the book was cheap; it was $2.99, so I bought a Kindle copy, and I was reading it for making that video. And he has these boxes where he explains some things at a much lower level. They're really condescending. The first one says, if you are a 13-year-old boy or a 60-year-old woman, you can understand if you give it, if you really try. And I was, okay.
Oh, wow. Again, it just blows the mind sometimes that people like in today's day can still think of these type of ideas and formulate this thought process when you can see it all around you that that's not the case.
And Braxton Hunter is a young guy. I don't know exactly how old he is, but I would guess mid-30s.
No, it's just ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. But in the end, I just think that as you stated, and that's why I started the Atheist Enlightenment, is because I'm in agreement with you as well. I think that there needs to be a nouveau Enlightenment era to come to understand the brain more, to understand what consciousness is, to understand the workings of things on a more deeper level and at a more fundamental level. And I think that the only way that we can do that is through working together and through collaborating with each other in order to try to find that truth, rather than dictating the truth, finding it together as a community, in a sense. And that's why I think a new, as you stated, a new enlightenment is needed just for that in itself. And I find that certain atheists, as I stated beforehand, are like islands in a sense, right? They're separate from each other, but they're not really united with each other in that common goal of creating a sense of community with each other. And that's what I'm trying to do, is like, okay, you guys are over there, you guys are over there, you guys are over there. Let's bring us all together and let's try to create this community much.
I would really like to see more open atheists elected to public office.
Agreed. 100% agreed. But sadly, just like how that poll stated, most theists even look at us as being worse than even criminals in a sense, right? So that's going to be a hurdle in and of itself to tackle. And
I've thought about running for something really simple like school board, but nobody knows me. I am absolutely, in my community, nobody knows me. And put my name on the ballot and everyone's going to go, who's that?
But I think that you're right. I think that it needs to start small and then slowly but surely start to grow into the bigger spectrums in politics and of just the body of politics in and of itself. And again, I think that in order to do that, there needs to be that sense of community, because how do the Mormons do it? How do all these other individuals do it? Is the sense of community first before anything else. And I
Mm,
think that's what we
mhm,
need to try to do with the atheist community, because we have such a great community in and of itself.
mhm.
And we have such knowledgeable people, we have such brilliant people, and it just seems that there's these just far off islands that people kind of just seclude themselves in, and I'm trying to wheel them into the greater fold in a sense. But before we end stream, because it is over the hour, 1 minute over the hour, but if anybody has any questions whatsoever, please ask your questions. And if not, then we will definitely close down the stream. But Godless Granny, thank you so much for coming on. It has been an ultimate pleasure being on your show and having you on my show. It's
Thank
been
you. It's been lovely being here as well. Beach Price asked me to put a link to my channel up.
oh,
I Yeah,
I'll
go
do
ahead because I don't have a wrench, so I can't do that.
Yeah, I'll do it right now, actually, while
Okay, and
we're
I'll
here.
go ahead and talk so that you can do that. But yeah, it has been a pleasure coming on. Free will is one of the things I absolutely love to discuss. Um, one other aspect, if you ever really want to watch a Calvinist self-destruct, is to talk about their high view of God and low view of man. I was absolutely flabbergasted that a Calvinist straight out said this to me in a stream that I was in with him. Is when he was talking about how it's okay for God to predestine people to hell even before they are ever born. And I asked him, "Do you have children?" And he said, "Yes, I have three children." And I asked him, "Can you go to heaven and be happy knowing that your children are burning in hell?" And he said, "Yeah, as long as I know why they're there."
Wow.
I know it was, and
No.
the one thing that I absolutely reacted to is that, you've lost your humanity.
Oh,
They
absolutely.
they have no sense of empathy whatsoever. But the one thing that I failed to do that I really wish I would have done was to caution him, "Don't ever let your children see this," because it would absolutely tear them apart, knowing that their dad doesn't care if they are being tortured. You know,
Oh,
I
absolutely.
yeah, I wish I would have said that, but it didn't occur to me until about an hour after the stream. I was just so blown away by what he said that I didn't think about how devastating that would be to his children if they ever saw that.
Yeah, that's the thing that I was thinking too, right?
Mhm,
If already you end up you have such a moral compass where that doesn't bother you whatsoever,
mhm,
my then I find that their moral standing is much, ooh, I shouldn't say much lower, but I can't stop from saying that though, much lower compared to anybody who doesn't believe in God but just cares for their kids, right?
mhm, mhm.
And that's where I wonder, where are their moral, why do they keep arguing based on morals if this is the thought process that they have? Because I know, if it's like when I become a father, that would not be a single thought that would come in through to my mind. Not at
Mhm.
all. My number one thing is that if there was a God and that God had stringent rules that had to be followed, the number one thing is that I would want my kids to go to heaven as well as me. And if they were in hell and I was in heaven, that would be my own personal hell.
Right, exactly. Mhm.
Exactly.
That's where I was trying to go with that, and I was just absolutely shocked that he went completely 180 from that direction.
Yeah, it's just mind blowing. It's just absolutely mind blowing to me that.
There's an interview where Matt Dillahunty interviewed, I can't remember his name. He's the guy that made that video where he confesses to murdering his father and what a horrible person he was. He confesses to being a complete psychopath, but now he's found Jesus, and Jesus is his moral compass. And because the Bible tells him to do this, this, and this, I'm able to control my actions and follow what God wants me to do.
Mhm.
And Matt Dillahunty did an interview with him, and Matt asked him, if you did not believe in God, would you go back to murdering people? And he said, oh yeah, absolutely. And Matt said,
Oh,
well, then I'm glad you
wow.
believe in God. You please keep believing in God if that's the only thing that's keeping you from murdering people.
Exactly. Like, and that's the thing that I constantly say too. There are, I think that certain people need the God hypothesis in order to behave in a certain way. Because if they didn't have that, their thought process would be, well, I can do whatever I want and nothing really matters. Obviously, most people don't think in that particular way, thankfully. So it's not any issue. Or actually, it is, because it's difficult when you come from a God world into a non-God world, for at least the first few years or whatever, for certain people. But no, please.
You just said something that really turned on a light bulb for me. Which is, I've seen so many Christians that say, well, the only reason you deconverted is because you don't want to be accountable to anyone. And I never put it together that that is the way they think, that the only reason I behave myself is because God tells me to. And if God didn't tell me to, I would be a murderer. I hadn't put that together yet. Yeah, that's interesting.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So it's just the thought process that I see with certain Christians, and definitely when it comes to an atheist, and is that, well, now you have no moral standard, right? Like now you can do whatever you want without any repercussions, which obviously that is not the case.
Mhm.
The
Mhm.
case is widely completely different compared to what they are thinking, but because they have the God world in their mind, that's the only way that they can think until they can leave that particular thought process and come to the non-God world and then realize, ah, okay, well, it's not everybody going make crazy and trying to go after each other with brutality or whatever the situation is.
And Vice Rhino has mentioned this a couple of times on videos, that if you really think about it, in the Christian worldview, atheists are the only ones that are responsible for themselves, because anyone who says, God, I believe in you, gets off scot-free for anything they do, but the atheist is held accountable. And
Yep,
so to say that we don't believe because we don't want to be accountable makes no sense in that worldview.
I completely agree. And henceforth, it's, at least to me, to I think the real reason why that they state that they have either no faith, or that they think all you just want to do is sin, or whatever the rest of those type of trying to trigger the atheists in a sense, is that I think that it's more of a fear on their point, right? Because they're sort of like, oh, okay, if they are right, not only is my own belief system wrong, but that means that I've been lying to myself the entire time. And not only that, but now I need to go into this not normal, moral relativism or whatever, like they are, in a sense. And I think that's why most theists are fearful of coming to atheism, because they just
Mhm.
feel that there's no fundamental value which is there that they can feel safe on, in a sense.
And Beach is absolutely right. Beach says, I was told that bad memories would be wiped away, and those bad memories are part of why I have empathy for others. Yeah, I was told that too, that when you go to heaven, all your memories of anything bad will be wiped away from you. But if my family is in hell and all memory of them is now wiped from me,
Mhm.
my argument was going to be, and I didn't get to the argument because the person went completely the opposite way I expected, is that are you sure that you are you? If most of the essence of who you are and what you were on earth has been wiped from your mind, are you still you, or is this someone else that's in heaven?
Exactly. Exactly. And from that point of view, that was something that I was thinking about too. Because you run into the same thing with the Islamic narrative as well. Because
Mm,
one's own children can also be sent to the hellfire and you can make it to heaven and be, well, supposedly perfectly fine within the grace of God himself. And it's
mhm,
just when I look, or at least how I see kids and stuff like that, and let alone my own, when I have my own, uh, if they're in hell, that would just tear me apart completely. So I don't know if that individual who's up there is going to be the same, if there is, he's going to be the same individual as the one that's down here, you know.
mhm.
And that's the a question to ask in a sense. But again, I really do love this conversation. If ever, because I would love to have you back on in the future, if ever you would wish to come back on, I would love to have you back on to have more conversations, maybe even on Calvinism, if that would be something that you're.
If you can actually get a Calvinist to come on the stream, that would be great.
I think I can find a couple. I think I can
Okay.
find someone. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
bring one on. Calvinists are breakfast.
Oh, now I'm interested. Okay, we can definitely do that. So again, thank you so much for coming on. It's been a pleasure, and I've enjoyed my time on this stream, just learning so much from you. So thank you so much for teaching me new perspectives, and definitely the Christian perspectives of Armenianism and of Calvinism. Like these things have always been kind of baffling my mind, and you have made it a little more clearer now than
Mhm.
how I was thinking beforehand. So I really do appreciate that, and I thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Everybody who's in the comments section, thank you so much for coming by. It's been great having you, and I hope that you've enjoyed yourself and enjoyed the conversation at hand. If you like what you've seen so far, please smack that like button and smack that subscribe button. It will definitely be greatly appreciated. Um, Tomorrow at the same time, 10 p.m., we're actually going to have a conversation based on determinism, and we're going to bring
Mm,
God into the deterministic realm,
mm.
but in an atheistic perspective of determinism. So we're really going to see what's the story there and how we can work around determinism, just like how we discuss free will and different prospects and even determinism today. So if you're interested in that topic matter, please smack that like button, smack that subscribe, and you will get notified based on the video that'll be coming tomorrow. I would also like to thank our Patreons. So I would like to thank Linear for being a Patreon. I also TART or the Atheist Roundtable, Mikey Famine, and Laura Magee. Thank you so much for helping out the channel and helping me do what I do and bring great information to such great individuals, such as our viewers today. And now it is time to say goodbye to everybody and see you tomorrow on the Atheist Enlightenment.
Live
Thank
your life.
you.